Next up, we're going to be doing HPMS review and getting feedback from the users. This was the first year that I think everyone, Catherine, or almost everyone used.
Yeah, everyone minus Wisconsin.
Okay, so use the HPMS UI that's in Jackalope. And so we'd love to get your feedback. I've said this 100 times, but in many people's minds, the HPMS reporting is basically the most important thing that we produce. And so getting it right, getting it easy to use, getting the statistics easy to QC is also super important. And we'd love to get your feedback on how to make it better if you guys had suggestions this year. Okay, just real quickly before we get into the HPMS UI itself, I just wanted to cover a little bit of the context where we are when we do HPMS, as well as some pretty key concepts and some things that might trip people up. And so I'm probably going to spend maybe 40 minutes, 30 minutes just reviewing the HPMS process to get it fresh in people's minds, and then we'll open it up and get whatever feedback you have. So let's talk about annual. Annual happens after, well, you'll be surprised to hear that annual happens once a year. And so essentially you run your daily files, you run your continuous, your short-term, your manual, your turning movements, whatever you do day by day by day, and you resolve your QC as time goes on. Then you run monthly, generate your ATR or continuous counter statistics, and send stuff off to Stephen for TMAS. And then once a year we do this. And the steps here are, we first do annual summarization, which is just like monthly, in the sense that we are trying to get our continuous count statistics done. So ADTs, AWBTs, all the things, D factors, etc., highest hours. Those are all done during the first phase of annual, called annual summarization. After that, we have the factor calculation. And again, this can happen monthly or annual, but I think almost everybody does it annually. The factor calculation generates factors based on the annual statistics we just created in phase 1. And we do it for each of the factor types that we support. So daily and seasonal factors, axle factors, growth factors, daily and seasonal class factors, which, excuse me, are applied to short-term classification data. Hourly factors, and I'm probably missing some, but that's roughly what they are. And those get done in phase 2, and with each of these steps, there's a QC part that goes along with it. After phase 2, after you've just recreated your factors for the year, you can run phase 3, which reevaluates all your short-term counts for the year based on the factors you just created. So this takes you from the preliminary ADTs that you did throughout the year into the official count ADTs that will be used as the official ADTs. Once that's done, you run phase 4, which is the site statistic generation. So phase 3 is generating count ADTs. So you may count the same site more than once in a year, and you'll get multiple count ADTs as a result. Phase 4, the goal of it is to get a single official site ADT that will represent that site. And that site ADT may be the result of just a single count. It might be the result of maybe averaging multiple counts together. Maybe you growth factor from prior years to get the current year site ADT, or you could also plug values. But the point of phase 4 is to get that official AADT number for each of your sites. Then we move on to 4.5, which most people don't know about, but it is there. It is a local roads interface that allows you to come up with AADT numbers for sections of your roadway that are just very rarely or never counted. So if you're in a rural area and you've got maybe 2 counts an entire city, this allows you to just kind of come up with a real quick estimate of an ADT for that city that you could then use just to have that ADT for every section which Meyer requires. HPMS is what we're going to talk about now. So once we've gotten all of our site ADTs from phase 4, now it's time to generate the other statistics, the other HPMS statistics that are interesting to the Stevens of the world. And then finally, optionally, phase 6 is where you push all of these statistics that are now official out to some external database like, Highways by Bentley or, Roads and Highways or whatever, somewhere where you might be publishing your official ADTs. Any questions before I move on? Let me actually get the thing up. Hold on. Nope, no questions. All right. Cool. Excuse me. So let's review some important HPMS concepts. And the first concept is a little bit confusing, and I think it trips some people up. But essentially, originally this was all scripts in SQL, and over the years, a whole bunch of, fine-tuning of those scripts have occurred at each individual state. And so things like, okay, well, we'll want to use a count if it exists, and if not, well, let's go ahead and use the route average, but only for these routes. And if we don't have a route average, then let's go back to the prior year and pull that forward. Otherwise, we're going to just use the factor group average or something like that. So the bottom line is there were all these fallbacks, and they were, different for every state. And so when we designed the HPMS UI, what we decided to do was essentially calculate a particular statistic like D factor, however we can. We're going to take the count if it exists. We're going to go ahead and pull the last year's forward if it exists. We're going to create route average statistics and factor group average statistics, or in Minnesota's case, parent-child, which is a way of associating child sites to a parent, and the child inherits that parent's statistics. So, or plugged, or I think that's right. And so we calculate all of those statistics, and then we just make one of those the official statistic based on precedence rules. Does that make sense so far? That I timed out, didn't I? Hold on.
It occurs to me, Joe, that now this is new than when you had ever demoed HPMS before, but how people can evaluate their bin schemes. Maybe you could make time to talk about that either now or at some point during your demonstration, or maybe you're already going to. Okay, never mind.
I'm ahead of you, man. All right. No, let me just go through some concepts, and then I'll go through what I think should be the annual. And actually, Catherine, probably you'll chime in if you don't mind, because you actually probably know better than I how people are actually using this. So we, again, to recap, because it confuses people, because they're like, why do I have 4 different statistics for this one site? And the answer is you don't. You have one official one, but we actually retain all the other ones to be used if you want to. We have the ability to, like, for these sites, oh, we used the route average, but it was horrible. So let me go through and instead plug the group average or something like that. So it's a little confusing. So I'm gonna go to, let's just go to K factor. I can explain what I'm doing in a second, but I just wanted you to see. Oh, and it's important you understand, Stephen or anybody, I'm using what looks like Minnesota data, but it's been so messed with over the years that you're going to see horrible statistics, and that they don't actually represent Minnesota statistics. They're test data and things like that. In fact, we have a really good example of that right here. So in this case, wow, that's awesome. So in this case, we have a group average of -313. Don't ask me how you get a negative group average, but like I said, this data has been messed with greatly. We have a, what are we looking at? K factors? We have a K factor of 128. That's pretty impressive. So if you hover over the count statistic, it'll actually tell you the numbers that went in to come up with that. And for whatever reason, we have an ADT of 7,000, a design hour volume, so the the peak hour of 9,012, and the time of that was midnight. So we're looking at some funky data here. And so the point is, we have a count number, which is 128.7. We have a group number, which is that crazy number. The actual final number is based on the precedence rules we set up, and we probably set up the count wins, right? That would make the most sense. You would use a count before you'd use a group. You set those up in the options screen here. In the HPMS statistics options, there's all kinds of options here, which I'm not going to go over. I just wanted to show you what the precedence looks like. So in my tests Minnesota database, basically we're just using counts. We're not even ever going to fall back. So, but that isn't probably what most people do. The second choice might be, well, if I don't have a count, then let's see if we can use the group average. Oh, and if I don't have a group average, actually, let's do this. Let's use a route average. Route averages are better than group averages. So we're going to do group average, and if all those fail, then we're just going to use last year's. That's fine, and that can be your default precedence. But then you can override that for particular site groups, and you can say, okay, for all my, I don't know, this like Wisconsin. I think it's Wisconsin has truck routes where it's really important that we get a really dialed in number, and so they might have a different precedent than this that makes sure that they get the number that they want. So those are the methods. So you get them all, you get as many as you can, but only one is chosen, and that's chosen through the method precedence. With regards to QC.
Christy posed a question.
Okay, let me see if I can, hold on. Well, Christy, when we actually implement, so essentially Christy's asking what the parent method in this precedence dropdown does. It probably does nothing because currently the parent-child logic is outside of Jackalope in a script. We will eventually incorporate that parent-child logic into the normal Jackalope, at which point it just becomes a normal precedence. A list for what these do, these being the statistic methods, like count, last year, factor, group average.
What's in the drop-down that you had for the precedence options?
These.
Is that the same list?
It should be. Maybe it's spelled differently or different abbreviations. I don't know. Yeah, count last year, group average, route average.
Okay.
Yeah. Yep.
So would that be? So when I say knowing what they do, we kind of know what count does, but like last year, is there more information on that, or is it?
You mean like you'd like a hover or something that explains that last year is?
Well, it's not in the user guide. It's just pointing to your video of Wyoming, which is 42 minutes.
Oh.
And I asked one of my staff to watch it and document it. They had a very hard time. So
I mean,
we run
can
this
make
once
sure
a year.
Yeah.
We run it once a year. We don't need the whole thing documented in detail, but you often need a refresher.
Yeah. Okay.
Just to go, what does that do again? And then
yeah, we
help.
make sure this in the user's guide. Kathleen, if you're.
It's already on my radar. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So with regards to QC, so the general process is you run your HPMS statistics, and hopefully you just don't throw that output at your HPMS coordinator, because what they're going to do is they're going to make everything into sections or whatever it is they do. They're going to post it to the HPMS program online, and they're going to get a bunch of these things, right? So these are all HPMS QC. So K factor out of range. It needs to be between 4 and 20. D factor out of range, it needs to be that. Each of these are different QC. So part of your HPMS process would be to run HPMS and then make sure you have dealt with QC. And it might be that these are perfectly acceptable. That one that we saw with 129 is probably not perfectly acceptable, but there might be others that are. So you can do that by looking at this here. You can click the show only rows with errors, and then this has a drop down of all of these, and you'll just see those errors. And so the idea is we deal with the QC before they get into the HPMS coordinator's hands. Is the plan. Okay.
Steven's
So
just
with
mentioning that he has seen sites out west with K factors over 25 reported.
Oh, really? Fair.
So I know one of the things I've seen when doing the HPMS stuff and review with Delaware and things like that are, you know, if a short-term count gets processed and maybe it's low volume and the high hour is, you know, 7 or something. I mean, you can really see some crazy numbers when you have a low volume site and what your highest hour of a short-term count is at times. And so it's real. It's the real number, but you can see some really whacked out numbers.
Yeah. Yeah, that's certainly true of low volume sites. And yeah, like if you have an ADT of 10 and 5 of those vehicles are in the design hour, there you go. Okay, so Steven says that's why FHWA, HPMS does not recommend using portable counts for K and D. Yeah. Okay. So with regards to the factors, or excuse me, the actual statistics that we report, there's 6 statistics other than HPMS that the HPMS coordinator is interested in from you guys. The K factor and D factor, what we were just talking about. And then the single unit and combo unit average / ADT. The average is a percentage. The ADT is an actual volume. So single unit percent or single unit volume. Combo, same thing. And then finally, single unit peak and combo peak. And each of these statistics can be evaluated separately here. So what we're looking at here is a summary view. Let me get rid of this. And the summary view just gives you the final official number for that statistic. Remember, there's going to potentially be more than one number for that statistic, but we're going to pick the final one based on the precedence rules that we set before. Come on, be faster. Okay. So this gives you, I won't be looking at the comments anymore, so someone yell at me. So this gives you the 6 statistics, and it's, so the K factor, D factor, single unit ADT, combo unit ADT, single unit peak, and combo peak. Whether you see the AADT or the average number, so this is actually 19 vehicles, not 19%, is dependent on one of the options. Some people prefer to do all this based on percentage. Some people prefer to do all this based on the actual value. So that's what determines what you actually see there. But we keep them both. Some QC are against AADTs like this one. Some QC are against percentages, maybe. But yeah, well, that's peak. 20, you could have a 20 peak. Wow. And so yeah, that's the summary view has all of that information, and it's, like I said, the class is either ADT or it is a percentage. Okay, let's see if I can, I don't know if I could do this. I'm going to try to do something. I'm sorry if you guys are getting dizzy. I'm missing my, where's my, shoot. Can I pause my screen so I don't make you guys dizzy while I do this? There we go. There it is. I found it. Okay, unpause. Link. Another thing to consider, and only one person, Chad, out there in Wyoming, has this available to him because he has traffic sections loaded into Jackalope. And when you have that option, you can change this interface to be done by a particular route. And when you do that, that gives you, of course, it gives you the ability to kind of just look up and down the route. Why is this all selected? Look up and down the route and say, oh, wow, okay, my percent change, or my final value. What is my final value? What are we looking at? D factors? Yeah. So my D factors are moving right along. You know, if somewhere right here in the middle you saw an 80 or something like that, that would be something to be concerned about. And these are continuous sites here. So this gives you the ability to just kind of scan real quickly and see if there's errors. This particular error, it's a little surprising for a continuous site to be that size, but this is Wyoming, so maybe that's correct. Yeah, all right. So one cool thing you could do with this, I don't think this will work. Hold on, I was doing something earlier. Stop making people busy. I'm gonna try to do this. It may or may not work. So basically, if you select everything, we have a function in there that Chad wanted us to do, which was pretty cool, which allows you to fill statistical gaps. There aren't any here, but you can override existing data. So basically, to fill statistical gaps, we'll do a best fit curve, you know, like a cubic equation or something like that, that will take data that you say, so you might say, I want to use all continuous data, and I want to spread that continuous data to sites that are uncounted or sites that don't have any statistic. Or you could even, you know, spread it to things that, like Steven says, don't use short-term counts, okay? Then you could spread it to anything that was either null or a short-term count. And like I said, it'll do a best fit thingy if you know your statistics. And so it'll be a nice smooth curve between each of these continuous sites. I'm just going to close that. I think it's going to take a while. Okay. So is that all I think that's all the things I wanted to cover on the concept side. Yeah.
I will read a comment that I'm going to read a comment Stephen had put out there, and he says having a good relationship between AADT, single unit, AADT, CU, commercial unit. Is that what that? I'm not sure what CU means. Huh? Combo? Yes, got it. Yep. And percent peak is always a good idea. This issue with percent peak, single unit, and combo unit happens a lot. Roughly 2.5 to 40% is the target range for percent peak, and the number of trucks and AADT for a given sample segment. And you may have to read that yourselves to grasp all of what I just read.
You can have a 40% peak. Wow, that's impressive. This is using the HPMS percent, which is dividing the highest hour by the AADT. Okay. All right, well, let's just talk about where, I'm hiding my comment screen again. So let's talk about how to actually run HPMS. Of course, you start by getting rid of all the prior HPMS steps that your state does. I mean, if you don't do the local roads, then obviously you don't have to do 4.5. You also don't have to do phase 3 if you don't want to. So just run what you guys need to run. You open the HPMS interface and you select the correct year. So that's this bad boy right there. And then you just hit the, oh, you first do the evaluate bin schemes. And this is important. In order for us to correctly come up with our classification statistics, we need to be able to understand how your class binning scheme map to the single unit and combo unit distinctions. So let this finish. I probably shouldn't have refreshed. This evaluate bin schemes button right here does exactly that. It's looking to make sure all of your data has the correct binning schemes. And I actually messed with this data, so it would come up like this. So this means things aren't great. So you can read this output, and Catherine and Laura run this every year, but this gives you a snapshot of, okay, so yeah, this is binning scheme FHWA 13. There are only 3 counts with that binning scheme for 2018, and here's how it maps. So bin 1 goes to passenger. Oh, well, this is stuff I messed up. So bin 2 goes to multi-unit, which is obviously wrong. Bin 3 goes to multi-unit, which is obviously wrong. So this is where you can figure out where things have potentially messed up. If you're not changing your binning schemes a lot, this is not something you probably have to worry about too much. This is only for, when you've changed a binning scheme, or like, for example, if you want to start using length data and you're messing with binning schemes, then that's when this is super important. Yeah, FHWA 15, there are 2,200 of those, and this is also messed up. Bin 2 is not multi-unit in the FHWA. And then Minnesota has some custom class thingies, and there are only 6 of those. Oh, and this doesn't have an HPMS group at all, so that none of those would actually produce statistics. And then custom to class, these don't have all the bins. So anyway, this is all messed up data on purpose, but the idea is this is where we could track down, oh, I had these link sites and the combo is way wrong. That's because, you put class 2 in combo. Not you, but, that's what happens. So
one other thing, I just was going to point out, one other thing that evaluate bin schemes does is tell you if you've got a lot of counts that never bound to any bin scheme. So it will show you length. You had 600 length counts and they weren't bound to any bin scheme, and that would show up there. And then a solution could be come up with, could be resolved between us and the users to try to figure out, so do we go and assign those for you automatically to help you? Same with class. So just another piece, but all of your data bound there, Joe. So there, we don't see an example of not bound.
Right. Yeah, and don't be afraid. This is something, we hold your hands through this, and we understand how to, interpret this, but it's more of a get your brain on board with, what words we're going to be using. It needs to be, we need to map input bins to FHWA bins, or HPMS bins, rather. Okay, so after evaluating the bin schemes, and you can now run the HPMS process. You're good to go. And you just do that. You come up here, I'm not going to do it, but you could click the run HPMS process. What happens when you do that is this log comes up and it'll start filling out what it's doing. And you don't have to stay in the HPMS screen. You could go away. It will keep doing its thing. But I wanted to make clear, did I put this in here? Yeah. So either watch the log until it's done, or look for this in the log. So finished running the full HPMS process, time taken 2.9 minutes, and then it's done. And 2.9 minutes is not very long in this particular case, but I think it takes longer in some states. So, it is probably the situation where you'll just want to go away and come back at a later date. And now, of course, we evaluate the QC issues, which I showed you how to do that. You can go through one by one and just show rows with, each of these errors, and just, see if they're good. If they're not, you can plug new values. or you can use the other methods. So remember, we have each of these methods available to us. Possibly more than one of them has been filled out, in which case, if the count looks wonky, maybe you want to just go ahead and use last year's value. And you could do that through the plugging interface in the detailed screen. And after you're done with the QC issues, you send it to your HPMS coordinator and you hide under your desk. And no, just kidding. You don't do that. But basically, hopefully that's it. Frequently, they come back with stuff, but depending on how your state goes, hopefully that's the end of it. This was not really.
Hey, Joe.
Yes.
Yes. Sorry to interrupt, but I was trying to. I was on phone, and so this is Stephen. I was responding to that comment that I put in the chat pod. So, value range of 2.5% to 40% is the number of either single unit or combination unit, depending on which statistic you're working with, that would be in your highest hour for that given portable site. So you wouldn't expect more than or less than 2.5% of the single units to be in 1 hour, and no more than 40% of the single units to be in 1 hour. So, so what we do is we do a calculation when we're doing the check, and we find this issue a lot, and I don't know what's causing it. Not necessarily with high desert customers. It just happens a lot in HPMS, where there will be segments where the percent peak value will be rather high, and when we do the calculation of taking the percent peak times the ADT, the resulting number of single units or combination units, depending on which one you're calculating, is way too high for how many trucks for the typical day is reported. That's the problem. Hope that makes sense. So I think doing that check inside your software would help out your customers a lot, that you take your percent peak value, multiply it times your sample ADT, and then look at that result of number of trucks that you get and make sure that there's no less than 2.5% and no more than 40% that are in that given sample.
Yeah, it doesn't look like we have that QC built in, so we'll definitely want to add that to the list. Did you understand that, Jeff, or Catherine, enough to document it, or is this good enough what he wrote?
Well, this is changing slightly with 2022 HPMS, because instead of being a percent peak value that was from actual count, which was historically what has been done, HPMS has changed this value and how it's supposed to be reported, and it's supposed to be percent peak, percent single unit for design hour, not the peak for the count anymore. So,
so that means by definition you can't use short-term counts, right?
That is correct. Yes. So you'll be using the same method they use for Ks and Ds, with distributing Ks and Ds factors from permit counts to the samples. That's where you would do the same for your relationship of single units and combination units to your samples.
Okay.
Hope that makes sense. It's
yeah.
Yeah.
It makes sense to me. It's a pretty sparse data set, but I guess if that's the best you got. So you're basically only using continuous data for anything except for the averages. Is that what I'm hearing you saying? I
know the single unit AT, combination unit AT are from the actual counts. Yes.
Yeah, that's what I meant, the averages / ADPs. Those are the only ones that would use short terms.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Correct. Yep.
Okay. You have that flexibility in the interface to do that. All right. Let me see. Where were we? Here we were. So that's a really quick overview. This was not intended to be a training session. There's a lot. There's a lot here. We could spend at least an hour just going over all the things that you can do. But it was really more to refresh your brain on what this looks like, and specifically to give us an idea of how we could make it better and easier for you to use. Not only easier, but more accurate for your end results. Are there any suggestions from your first year using this UI?
So I'm hearing, based on what Stephen is saying, is almost maybe we need a new parameter. Just throwing this out there, the precedence almost could be different for volume statistics versus class statistics.
Well, it's not all class statistics. It's only 2 class statistics. Currently, how you would implement that is you would just do SI group. You'd have, most people have a continuous SI group. And you would say, okay, for my continuous site groups, if you've got one, pretend I have a, oh, we do have continuous. Well, there's lots of continuous, but let's say that was all continuous. You'd say for them, I want to use a count first, and then I want to do whatever. But for but the default should never be count, right? Or, let me think.
I was just commenting that precedence applies to every statistic versus maybe.
Oh, that's true. That is true.
Using, that's what I was saying, is maybe we break out a precedence for continuous, class versus volume type statistics.
Yeah.
And then Steven's asking, is VMT weighting of the HPMS summary table available from Jackalope? And Joe, you can speak to that. We don't store mileage.
Well, so not generally, because Stephen, we don't have lengths. We don't know how long a section is. We usually, I'm saying usually because we actually break this in a few of our clients' things. Usually we can't do weighted by VMT because we don't know the VMT. Jackalope is generally just a point database. So that goes up to, whoever the HPMS coordinator that basically sectionalizes it, they can do the weighted VMTs. Although we do, for a couple people actually we do know how long sections are, and we can do that, I believe. So Nicholas says, an output of all records that are finalized that will have an HPMS error when done would be nice. I could give that to our HPMS coordinator with our notes on why we may be allowing those records. Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, I made a note to make a JIRA for that because that sounds very reasonable.
Yeah, and we do have an easy way of creating notes. I think, yeah, you do have to be, so if you're looking at K-factors, for example, this allows you to create notes in mass. So if you have one route that all is wrong for the same reason, or not wrong, all is out of range for the same reason, but it's correct, you could go down and click the correct ones, and then hit the create notes button, and it would create notes for each of those. And you wouldn't have to put a flag on it. It would just be a note. And then what you said, Nicholas, then we could have a report or whatever that produces a list of all those, like you said, to give the HPMS coordinator. That's a good idea. I mean, I think we just need precedence rules by statistic type, which I thought we had, but I must be crazy.
We don't.
Okay, so I'm crazy. We agree.
I think this UI in general just needs more documentation, because if I were to like hand it, let's say somebody at Minnesota leaves and this becomes someone else's responsibility, training someone new on this UI is terrifying unless they have like more guidance on how it works.
I think documentation is good, but also just from a user experience perspective, I would like to know, what would make it less terrifying. If people have any kind of ideas on what we could do to make it so that it's not so scary, I would be very open to that input.
I think sometimes knowing like what's going to happen when you click a button and if you're going to ruin stuff or if you can just run it and rerun it. If it's a step that you can do more than once and not worry about the output you get.
So, like specifically, like running here, it would tell you. I think it does tell you, maybe. I don't know. Oh yeah, this allows you to preserve or not preserve stuff. But maybe you're talking about some of the other actions, like plug. Obviously, plug values is, I think, one way, isn't it? I think it is. Yeah. I mean, it sounds, what I'm hearing is better feedback to the user for pretty much anything here. Whether it's hovering and getting some sort of useful thing, and or user guide documentation.
So at the bottom is, create export, and then it goes out and generates that CSV that everybody can provide to
That's true.
others.
That is the last step, you're right.
And so it almost seems like that might be where we're getting requests that we're working on now, and things where people would like more information in that export. And so that's one thing I've noticed. Improvements in the things that come out in here, which,
yeah,
I guess we have to have it in the grid first so that it can come out to the CSV is what I'm guessing. I don't know.
Well,
It's on our Jira board right now for a Nevada request. They want to see when account was taken, what date account was taken.
yeah, it doesn't have to be in the grid.
Okay. Okay.
Although that might be useful information to have in the grid, it doesn't need to be. Oops. Amber alert. Okay, I guess we don't. It's probably one of these calc variables, but that's okay. Yeah, there it is. It's obviously in calc variable 3. That should have been obvious. Come on.
But I don't think the way you build this grid, if it exports what's in the grid versus, oh, maybe, yeah, they're in the CSV export, but not the button at the bottom, generate export. I think that's pre-made.
Generate export doesn't care about the grid at all.
Yeah, yeah.
It just goes out to the database and does a query, and which of course the grid is driven from the same database as the export is. But yep.